I felt that Radagon Is Marika statement explains almost nothing, but the Shadow of the Erdtree finally showed me how this may have been happened. Not because it showed who Radagon was, but because it revealed how Radagon may become Marika. I think the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC quietly suggests that Radagon and Marika were never originally one being. Instead, they became one through the same kind of divine process that was witnessed with Miquella and Radahn. And if that is true, then one of the Elden Ring's most famous revelations isn't wrong, but I've just been asking the wrong questions the entire time. For years, the debate has focused on identity. Was Radagon secretly Marika? Was Marika secretly Radagon? Were they always two halves of the same person? But after Shadow of the Erdtree, I don't think identity is a mystery anymore. I think ascension is. And the more I look at Miquella's final journey, the more I wonder if From Software wasn't showing us Miquella's future. Maybe they were showing us Marika's past. The first piece of evidence doesn't come from Marika at all. It comes from Miquella. Throughout Shadow of the Erdtree, we learn that being a god is not a simple individual achievement. The story emphasizes the relationship between a god and a lord. A lord will usher in a god's return. A lord's soul requires a vessel. By the time we reach the Gate of Divinity, Miquella's fate cannot be separated from Radagon's. What fascinates me is that the Elden Ring DLC never presents this relationship as a merge alliance. This isn't a king and his knight, not a ruler and a servant. This is something stranger, closer to a union. When Miquella appears alongside Radahn, their stories converge into a single divine project, and when they fall together. That creates a problem for the traditional understanding of Marika. Because Marika also reached the Gate of Divinity and also became a god. And now we're left with the simple question. If Miquella required a lord for ascension, why should we assume Marika ascended alone? For the first time, I don't think that is a safe assumption. In fact, I think the DLC is encouraging us to question it. The biggest thing that has always bothered me about the traditional interpretation is Radagon himself. Radagon has ambitions, relationships, victories, failures, he wages wars, marries Rennala, he fathers children, he develops his own philosophy, he becomes one of the most influential figures in the Lands Between. When I compare Radagon to someone like Saint Trina, the difference feels enormous. Saint Trina exists almost entirely in relationship to Miquella. Radagon doesn't. Radagon feels like a person, a real one. And then there is Marika's famous dialogue.
In Marika's own words, O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both, mine other self.
I've always found that line strange. Because if Radagon has always been Marika, who exactly is he becoming? Why phrase it as a transformation? The wording feels less like revelation of identity and more like a prophecy. Almost as if Marika knows that a merger is coming. Almost as if Radagon has not yet reached the state that history will eventually remember. And after seeing Miquella and Radahn, that possibility becomes much harder to ignore. I think the important piece here is a Gate of Divinity. For years, discussion about Radagon focused on origins. Where did he came from, where did he appear, why is he absent from the certain part of history? But what if those aren't the most important questions? What if the important question is what happened at the gate? Because the gate doesn't simply grant power, but transforms people and changes the nature of existence itself. And this entire process is defined by transformation. That is what makes me reconsider Marika. Perhaps the reason Radagon and Marika eventually become one is not because they began that way. Perhaps they became that way because godhood demanded it. The Gate of Divinity may not reveal hidden identities, it may create them. If that is true, then Radagon Is Marika stops being an origin story, but becomes the outcome of a session, the final state rather than the starting condition. And I think that interpretation explains far more than the traditional one ever did. The deeper I go this path, the harder it becomes to ignore what happened to the descendants, because duality appears everywhere. Miquella and Saint Trina, Mesmer and the Abyssal Serpent, Malenia and the Scarlet Rod. Again and again we encounter characters whose identities are intertwined with other focused beings or aspects of themselves. At some point the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss. And I've started wondering whether these entire bloodlines carry the consequences of whatever happened during Marika's ascension. Perhaps the union of Marika and Radagon created more than a god. Perhaps it created a lineage marked with division, fusion and overlapping identities. That would explain why these ideas keep returning generation after generation. because they all originate from the same event, the moment Marika crosses the threshold into divinity. And if that is true, then Miquella's story starts looking like a history repeating itself, a child unknowingly following the same path as his mother. For years we've treated Radagon identity like the central puzzle. Who was he? Where did he come from? What was his secret? But after Shadow of the Erdtree, I don't think that is a mystery anymore. The real mystery is ascension. Because the Elden Ring DLC introduces a model of godhood that depends on relationships, unions, vessels and transformations. A model where a god doesn't stand alone. A model where becoming divine may fundamentally change what a person is. And once that possibility exists, Marika and Radagon begin to look very different, like the aftermath of a divine process. A process we may have finally witnessed through Miquella and Radahn. So, when I look at the famous relationship now, I don't see it in the same way. Radagon Is Marika may still be true, but I no longer think it's the beginning of the story. I think it's the ending. The final result of a session that has fused two lives into one existence. And if Shadow of the Erdtree was showing us how Miquella hoped to become a god, then it may also have been shown us something far more important. It may have shown us how Marika became one first. Thanks for watching, hit that like button and subscribe for more Elden Ring and other Souls-like games, lore and guide videos, and stay sharp out there, Tarnished.